Welcome to the Open to Hope show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Heidi. It's so much fun being on another webinar, and we've got a fabulous guest today, Laura Diehl, and Laura is one of our Open to Hope authors. And what I want to remind you is that the Open to Hope show is brought to you by our foundation, Open to Hope, in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. And I know this is going to be an important show for you today because we're going to be talking about the new year and taking care of yourself during this new year. And Laura Diehl's got some fabulous ideas on how to do that. Welcome to our show, Laura.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So great to have you on. Well, Heidi, why don't you introduce Laura?
Sure, I would love to, Mom. Laura is very, very involved in the grief and loss world. She is an ordained minister. She is the founder of Grieving Parents Sharing Hope. She's written 7 books. She has a blog, webinars. She's done everything you can imagine. She speaks all over the country. She is really an expert in the field, and she does it all in honor and in tribute to her daughter, Becca, who died at 29 years old after a battle of cancer.
You want to tell us about your pictures here, Laura?
Sure. Yeah, the one in the top left corner is Becca when she was barely 4 years old. She had was diagnosed with cancer when she was 3 and had her left leg amputated. It was bone cancer and went through 9 months of chemotherapy. And it ended up that one of the chemo drugs they gave her long term, they found out, was heart damage for kids that were given this drug. And so her last 10 years of her life were just a roller coaster. She was in and out of the hospital, several heart surgeries, trying to keep her heart going. They wanted to get her to transplant, but she just was actually too ill to even be on the transplant list by the time they got the ball rolling. And so they gave her a heart pump to keep her alive for a while and all kinds of issues with that. She had 3 med flight rides, like a dozen ambulance rides the last 18 months or so of her life. And at 29, it was October 12, 2011, her heart just gave out and she left.
It's amazing to me when you tell us about her journey, how despite her very, how ill she was and sick she was, what a full life she had here. You're talking about 10 years. I mean, she got married.
She was married, yep.
She had a child. I mean, she didn't allow this to let her stop living her life, which I find incredible.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is a lot of times we talk about the death of a child being like an amputation. That a very part of our being has been cut off of us. And for me, that is such a realistic view because Becca had an amputation and we lived with that part, of life, knowing what it's like to live with her leg missing and just those constant reminders and the weird things that would come up, Becca, get your leg on, we're leaving now, or, get your leg out of the living room, we're tripping over it, buying shoes, one foot grows, the other doesn't. How do you deal with that? Just the day-to-day life of living with an amputation. And yes, there are constant reminders and constant obstacles, but like you said, it is possible to learn to live a full life beyond that. And so she was a wonderful illustration for me that I like to give other people. And I actually have her little bitty first prosthetic leg from when she was 3 years old, and I travel with it and I show people as an illustration.
That's fabulous.
Well, give us some of the do's and don'ts and some of the things you've learned over the years. One of the things that inspires me is not only did you suffer the death of a child, but you also, like many people that will be watching this show, have had to go through adversity even before that. And I love your spirituality and how that's helped you too.
Becca is the first loss. I mean, both Dave and I have our parents still. So to have the first major loss in your life be your child was just, I had no grid for that. So yeah. So the first don't that I have discovered and that I think is really important is don't let this become your identity. I know for a long time I wanted to introduce myself to people as, hi, I'm Laura and my daughter died. I just felt I mean, we do go through that suffocating darkness and there's nothing we can do about that, but it's like we get to a point where we want to be the victim and we want people to feel sorry for us. We want people to know how much pain we're in. We want people to know that you could never understand. You've never gone through as much pain as I have. And so when we do that, it keeps us, it either spirals us down further into the blackness or it keeps us there.
We also want people while we're in that space to acknowledge and validate what we're going through. And sometimes people can do that, but other times people really, they don't do that. And then we get disappointed and angry about it.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah. And I think we kind of have to figure out where we are in this. You know, am I wanting people to validate it because I want them to feel sorry for me and I want to be the victim? Or do I just really need people to validate this hurts? Right. And I'm having a hard time living and breathing right now. So yeah, it's important to be able to, you know, really be honest with yourself about where you are in this process, because they're both very legitimate.
I love it. Compassionate Friends is one that says, realize you're still the parent of your child who's no longer on earth. You know, I think it's particularly when I go to the Compassionate Friends and they have somebody who has no children, you know, their only child died, and they say, that they're still parents. And it's so important to remember that you're still parents.
We have other things that will give us identity. And one of the questions that I ask is, do you really want your identity to come from the death of someone that you love? Or do you want your identity to be remembering the life of that person and continuing the life of that person and continuing their legacy?
And I think it's important that we think this new year, for some people who are ready to make those shifts in your thoughts, these are great ideas.
I think there's a difference between being identified as a bereaved parent and letting it define you. Don't believe that you're stuck in this place of hopelessness and darkness and that you're never going to be able to get out. I know we feel that way. And if we want, we can find people who will agree with us in that. That's what happened to me when Becca first died, because I didn't know anyone who'd lost a child. And so I started searching. And some of the people that I first started connecting with were those people who were stuck. And they were telling me, you're never going to get out of this. You're always going to be a mess, that kind of a thing.
What people were responding to is that you don't get over the person, but you do get over the pain. And it's helpful for people on the outside to tell you that, hey, sometimes when you're in early grief and in pain, even later on in grief, you don't see that you've made progress. You don't see that you're actually not in the same place. You need somebody on the outside to say, hey, wait a minute. You're not the same person you were the day that your child or your sibling or your spouse died. You're in a very different place than you were on that day. I know sometimes it feels like you're in the same place, but you're actually not. Because I knew you on that day and I know you now, and you're in a different space.
You know, that's what I love about Compassionate Friends, is because you see people at different levels and you realize how far you've come.
A lot of people, they tend to say, well, time will heal the pain. And to me, it's not time that heals the pain. It's what you do in that time that heals the pain. And I think that's sometimes why people around us who've never been in the place where we are in that deep grief, that they give us a timeline. Shouldn't you be over this by now? Shouldn't you be past this? Shouldn't you be getting on with your life? And I think that's because of that saying, well, time heals all wounds. And it doesn't necessarily do that. It's based on what do I do to work towards my healing, to get out of this place of darkness.
You know, Laura, when you say that time to get over it, I wanted to check in with Heidi on that, because that is so huge for siblings. My gosh, you're back in school. There's going to be a prom. It's a month since your brother died or sister, but you got to come to the party, right?
Absolutely. And I always say to anyone out there that's grieving, you know, sometimes, like you always said, Mom, you have to fake it till you make it. Because, you know, when you're a sibling like I was, and my brother died when I was 20, people don't give you very long to grieve. I mean, after 2 weeks, my sorority sisters and my friends wanted me to act fun and like a 20-year-old and carefree. And that was really hard because I was in a very dark place. And sometimes I had to put on the mask and just, stuff what was going on. That's why it's important to find other people that have had a loss, so that you don't feel alone, you don't feel hopeless, and that you can go and talk to them and they get it. Because so many people don't get it if they've never been there.
Yeah, and I think parents sometimes get cut a lot more slack than the siblings.
Well, I think I agree with you, and I think part of that is age. I mean, when you're young, people don't know what to say, know what to do, and they haven't had those experiences. Although I know a lot of bereaved parents don't know anyone else that have had children die either. We're in a kind of a really strange position oftentimes. Because
Yeah, and I think another group that doesn't get acknowledged very often is when an older child dies, like Becca, who was married and had her own family. All the attention goes to the spouse and the children.
Yes.
And nobody thinks about the parents who are in deep, deep grief. And so that's another area where people don't understand, especially when you have an adult child who passes, why you're still such a mess.
Laura, that is such a good point. There is such a hierarchy even in the grief world. And I worked with 9/11 families for 10 years, firefighter families that lost someone in the Trade Center. And like you said, a lot of the firefighters were married. And so really a lot of the support went to the bereaved spouses and not the parents or siblings.
And I'll bet you almost every one of those spouses are remarried by now. And it's not that you can ever replace that person, but there are holes that can be filled in certain ways, and a child is just not one of them. A sibling's not one of them.
Right. And I think it's really important that we don't compare loss, because the worst loss that ever happened to you is the one that's happened to you right now.
Exactly.
We've got somebody who's obviously a widowed, and says, Janet, she says that the ugly grief monster raises its ugly head when you least expect it. The widow community refers to the grief monster as the GM or monster.
Oh, I like that.
I heard a friend of mine after her husband died, I remember her saying specifically, having a spouse die is the worst thing that can ever happen in your life. And you know what? It was the worst thing that could ever happen in her life. You just don't. I used to, when I was in private practice, after my son died, I would hear people talk about breakups or whatever. And I'd think, wow, they don't even know. But then I realized, you know what? If all you've ever had is a hangnail is a hell of a thing.
That's very true. Yeah, and so many people who've lost their spouses are constantly told, you need to get out there and meet people. You need to find someone, and it's like, I don't want to find someone. I don't want to move on. I think of a cousin I have that's in that situation, and that can be really hard, because it's the same thing. People around you are trying to get you to move on, and not really allowing you to be on your own timetable and your own process.
And I hate to say it, but I don't think a lot of times they're thinking about your own good. They're thinking about it's too much trouble. I want you to be back. I want life to be predictable. I've got other problems. Let's just, go on. I'm glad to help you, but don't take too much energy.
Right. And even when we move on, nobody can replace the person we lost.
Exactly.
Right? That person is unique to themselves. No one is ever going to take their place. They can't.
But you don't have to stay stuck there. I mean, there is hope to move on. There is healing. So yeah.
And Laura says to all the panelists, uncles and aunts also don't get much notice. I lost a nephew that was very much like a son to me. That is so true.
And grandparents is another huge one. Because not only if you're a grandparent, it's like there's nothing like it in the world being a grandparent, and to think you lose that legacy, that special relationship with the grandchild, plus you have to watch your own son or daughter go through that suffocating grief of losing their child. It's like a double whammy that a lot of people don't acknowledge either.
Like you said, there's so many people that are disenfranchised after a loss. And like you said, Laura, grandparents, aunts and uncles, there's many, many people that don't really get support or acknowledgement or validation.
Mm-hmm.
So here we've got some more questions. Janet says, she's the one that made the comment about spouses. She said, we don't move on, we move forward carrying their love with us. The same can be applied to loss of a child. Absolutely. And Nicole says, people want you to move on because they are uncomfortable with their grief, exclamation point, which is good. And Jenny says, I'm feeling so hopeless. My son's death reached the third mark of a couple of weeks ago, third year mark, a couple of weeks ago. PTSD has set in big time, nightmares and flashbacks.
Two things I think that a lot of parents who've lost a child don't understand is that experts say that the loss of a child is traumatic grief. And the other thing is that anything 5 years and under is considered fresh grief.
going through the flashbacks and all those things can be very normal. I don't know how hard it is for her to get out of bed or anything, but I just saw something that I really like, and I'm going to show my students. There is an organization devoted to tapping, and they're using it with kids that have been in the trauma of Newtown. And the guy that's doing it just wrote a best-selling book, and he's a therapist on it. And it's very, very quick.
If it is interfering with your daily living, if you're not able to get up and go to work, or, you know, it's really messing with your home life or whatever, I think the 3-year mark's really important, because that's a time when a lot of people are starting to move out a little bit and feeling a little better and starting to see hope again. If you're feeling like you're really back in the hole, you might want to seek some professional help. Particularly if you are having flashbacks on a trauma. I've seen people who gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, that kind of thing, or they were in the car, they had a moment that they flash back to, and every time they flash back, their brain relives that moment. And there are some really wonderful things that you can do in therapy. EMDR, rapid eye desensitization. You can look EMDR up on the internet and find somebody who does that. In a couple of sessions, working with someone, you can get out of that traumatic event.
And I'm in a private practice, and I have quite a few people, and many of them are bereaved parents that are in those trauma narratives, Mom, that are stuck in that trauma, and they talk about their trauma with me in detail so that they can talk to somebody about it and get it out of their system. And then, like my mom said, those psychologists and therapists out there can help you. That's what we're here for. So like you said, maybe seeking somebody out that is a professional so that you can talk about what's going on with you.
Get in touch with your local hospice or hospital and find a group that has some of the same issues that you do. If it's a spouse loss group or whatever, there's some wonderful places on the internet. Michelle Neff Hernandez has Soaring Spirits Foundation that you can pick up. She does a lot on the internet, but also has conferences. But the more you can tell your story, I always say, tell your story till it's boring. When it bores you, you're moving along. Jenny, thank you. That's a great idea. My son was murdered. What I keep reliving all of a sudden is watching them administer CPR at the hospital, and then a little funeral home, his dead body. It just makes me so incredibly sad. Jenny, you would be a perfect person for rapid eye desensitization. If you have a moment of time that's captured on your brain, they actually work with you on following a motion, a left-right motion that makes the brain not be able to process the picture that you're reclaiming all the time. So try rapid eye desensitization.
And the other thing I want to say is that if this person feels like they really do have full-blown PTSD and they're stuck in this narrative for 3 years, they could also log on to Dr. Catherine Shear's Complicated Grief organization. It's on the internet, and go and just get an assessment, because she has a great something that she's doing now where you tell your story and you tell it on a tape recorder, and then you can control when you listen to it and when you stop it, and have some control over that trauma. And she's gotten great success with people that have really severe trauma and do have PTSD and have complicated grief, basically, which, by the way, is less than 10% of the population.
Yeah, it is not that high. Most grief is hard work, and it's not seen as complicated.
Most of
Holly Scott, our family is intertwined with grief. How do I support my family when I'm present and expected to listen? This makes my grief worse. My 19-year-old daughter died with 5 others in the same car crash. My mother passed away a year later, and my brother died from a heart transplant. Wow. All my grandparents have passed. My 2 aunts have passed. All the deaths have my dad very sad. I've been expected by other family. I should be there for my dad, but he also abused me in my childhood. It's hard to be supportive. I have PTSD from my daughter's car accident. I feel my family also needs to take responsibility for grief. Yes, Holly, the answer is no. I can't do it. I'm not available. I'm going to give you a hall pass, girl. When you get uncomfortable, get up and leave. You can leave situations. And
we all give you permission to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We all give you permission to leave, right?
Yeah, you have to take care of you. It's that whole oxygen mask. I can't take care of other people if I can't breathe myself, if I am not healthy myself. And when you've gone through that much loss, especially in deep loss, you need to take care of you. You need to heal. And it's like, who cares what other people's expectations are? You've got to, like Gloria said, you've just got to say, no, I can't. I am not capable. I'm not physically capable. I'm not emotionally capable. I can't. It's not in me because I'm not healed yet to be able to, be there for everybody else.
Yeah, and Holly, you might want to get a really good grief counselor because you've been through so much loss. You need someone that's there for you, that's there listening to you, and that can help you navigate all these relationships and all these demands that people have on you.
ADEC, Association of Death Educators, ADEC. You can go on there and they will give you trained people who are licensed to specialize in grief and loss. So there are ways to find somebody. I know it's hard when you're in a loss and you got to go be trying to dig up a therapist. That is
well, and the other thing that Holly said was she was worried about her father. And I will tell you, as a bereaved sibling, that is a very normal thing. There is a Facebook page called Sounds of the Siblings. It's a Compassionate Friends closed Facebook page for siblings. And there's a lot of support on it. There's about 3,000 members on it. There's a lot of sibling support. So that's another thing you might want to do is join that Facebook page. Because what you're talking about, Holly, having to be there for your father and worrying about your father is something that all siblings feel. We worry about our parents and we feel like we need to take care of them.
She's had enough loss that she's sitting there listening. And so people take that as like you're this vessel that can keep listening because and you've got to realize that you do need to take care of yourself.
Shop around, Holly. There's amazing grief therapists out there and there's horrible ones. If you don't feel a connection, your first session should be interviewing the therapist to see if you feel comfortable with that person. And if you don't go back.
If they're scared about your story,
That's
want to talk about some childhood event rather than talk about your current loss, then you need to find somebody that can help you. First Candle on the internet and ask some of these people for resources. And also, I think it's important to look at your local hospitals and whatever and ask them who they found helpful. And you can also ask them for names of people that have been there. And if you can also find a group for a sudden infant death, if you go to that group, maybe you don't want to do group, but some people in the group or the leaders will know of good counselors in your area.
The other thing is the Compassionate Friends. Again, I'm on their national board of directors. They have a closed Facebook page for people that have lost infants or that have had miscarriages or that have had babies that have been born dead. I'm on that page because I've had a couple of miscarriages. It's very supportive. Everybody on there has had a shared experience. There's going to be people that have lost infant sons and daughters, and they're very valuable resources.
Nicole says, some who are grieving are afraid to be honest with others as to where they are in grief and try to help everyone in doing that. They don't look at themselves. That's for sure. There are some people who really try to give grief advice to people when they haven't looked at their own. I agree with that. I think that's what you're looking for in a good friend or a good therapist or a good group, is people who are honest.
Well, sometimes it's easier to help other people than help yourself. And I know that that's what we as siblings always say. Sometimes we put our grief on hold and on a shelf while we help our parents. And sometimes it's hard. It's really hard to kind of look at your own stuff and say, wait, wow, this is a lot. And I'm dealing with a major significant loss as well.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people too who they dig into something right away. They start some sort of an organization, a memorial fund or whatever, because they're not ready to deal with the grief end of it. And then 2 or 3 years later, the whole thing falls apart because they were so busy reaching out and helping other people that they didn't allow themselves to go through the grieving process they needed to.
Absolutely. But I think, and I want to say to everyone, we should try to stay out of judgment, because Candy Leitner, who started MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Heidi and I know her well and have had her on a lot of shows. And Candace says, I started too early. I started MAD immediately and I had to grieve 3 years later. I would suggest to people that they grieve now. But the reality is we wouldn't have had MAD without her. So how can we judge, what people do with their time?
There's no timetable. You have to do what's right for you, and only you can know what that is. Even other grieving parents or grieving spouses or whatever, they can't tell you what your grief timetable should be.
Absolutely, or what you should be doing now. You have to
Mm-hmm.
follow your own heart and your own wisdom, because we do have wisdom, and we have grieving wisdom. I mean, grief is a natural process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we forget that. We know how to do it. We've had loss. We've lost early on. We've lost hopes, dreams, even things as small as that. We've learned how to deal with loss. Sometimes I think we just get scared with the whole process and think we're not going to be able to make it. But you will. Nicole said, I'm not sure if anyone else is from Ontario, Canada, but we have bereaved families in Ontario. Thank you, Nicole. That's great. And Janet says, Holly, get your dad to check widowedvillage.org. That's great.
Like that.
It's strictly for widowed people. Yeah. So the internet's such a great place, and it's so great to see. The people I worry about, frankly, Laura and Heidi, are the people that aren't on today.
Mm-hmm.
The ones who aren't going to any groups, who aren't doing anything. But, people who are on today are working on the process.
I think it's vital to connect with other people who are further down the road than you, that can walk with you through it. This is one of my, this is like, I'll call it my go-to when I talk to grieving parents or anyone who's grieving a deep loss. It's huge. It's a huge piece of the puzzle. And the whole thing with unforgiveness is that it takes root in you, and you become bitter, you become angry, and it comes out in so many ways that you don't even realize. And a lot of times we feel like, I can't forgive that person. I can't forgive God for letting, my child die. I can't forgive that drunk driver who hit my child. I can't forgive. And the truth, really deep down, the truth is that you won't forgive. It is a choice. Forgiveness is a choice. It's not based on our feelings. It's not based on our emotions. And the purpose of forgiveness is not to let somebody off the hook. The purpose of forgiveness is to give you emotional freedom, because it is a chain that will hold you down and will keep you in a very dark place. And like I said, you become a very angry, bitter person. And there's an illustration I love to give about this, feeling like I can't forgive, whatever it is, whoever that person is an elephant. If circuses aren't as big anymore, but a lot of times you would go and you would see a huge elephant just tied up with a rope, and it's kind of almost scary. It's like that elephant could just pull that thing off and stampede us, but they don't. And when you find out what they do is a baby elephant, they will chain it to something that it cannot get away from. And that baby elephant will pull and pull and pull and pull until, months later, it will give up. It will decide, I'm chained. There's nothing I can do about it. And once that elephant gives up, that baby elephant, they can tie it to the most simple thing. As soon as it feels something around its ankle, he's convinced he can't break free, and he won't even try. And that's a lot like we are with forgiveness. It chains us, and we have ourselves convinced that I cannot break free of this, but we can. And it can be a fight sometimes, but the bottom line is it's a choice to allow yourself freedom, to be free from that person, be chained to them emotionally, to that person. And there are so many people we have to forgive. It may be somebody that was directly or indirectly related to the death of that person. It could be ourselves. A lot of times we accuse ourselves, we, put ourselves in a guilt trap, and we won't forgive ourselves. Forgiving even that person that died. I know it sounds
Laura, let me ask you something. This is important, because you're saying what I always hear, and I worked with the 9/11 families for 10 years, and what they said is there's no way they're going to forgive the terrorists who murdered their firefighters.
Forgiving someone is not saying what you did is okay.
Okay.
Forgiving someone is saying, I'm no longer going to allow myself to be consumed by how angry I am at you and maybe how much I hate you. I am not going to let that emotion run my life anymore. I don't want to be stuck to you the rest of my life because I'm so angry and refuse to forgive, because that's really what it does. We stay chained to that person emotionally when we refuse to just release ourselves from that. I know there's a book out called The Shack, and it was made into a movie recently. And I loved that book before Becca ever died, and she had her own copy. And one of the things in this book and movie, his daughter is murdered. And one of the things that he has to deal with is that forgiveness of that man who murdered his daughter, and the choice he has to make. And just repeating those words over and over again, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. And you're not going to feel it right away, but it's kind of like love, true love. We have to choose. We marry someone we love deeply, and then day-to-day life, sometimes we don't even like that person. Or you go through that clash with your children or whoever. But love is a choice. It's not based on your emotions. It's a commitment. It's a choice. True love. You choose to stay with that person, to love that person beyond how they treat you, how they act, or whatever. And it's not to say stay in an abusive relationship. I'm not saying that, but forgiveness is the same type of thing. It's a choice. Our emotions can be totally the opposite, but we can make a choice. I'm not going to stay in this place of anger and hatred and bitterness and let it destroy my life and the lives of everybody around me, because it can do that.
Right. It can destroy your health, and it can destroy relationships. And I think that's really the main issue. I mean, when you hold on to anger, it hurts your body physically and psychologically. Mom, did you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say that we've done some shows on forgiveness, and people can go on opentohope.com and look at forgiveness. We've done some fabulous shows, and one of the people that was on the show comes up for me. He said, pick a way at it. Pick a little tiny thing that you can forgive them for to start with. Like my cousin's son was driving the car when my son was killed. Obviously was not driving particularly well. And he hit a retaining wall, and the car blew up, and they burned to death. And the first thing I could forgive him for is being a young man.
A teenager.
It's that simple. Not even thinking about him driving the car. I forgive you for being young and irresponsible. So he said, find the small things that you can forgive, and then work up to the bigger. Sometimes you have to go a little further down the road. Before you forgive a doctor who gave the wrong medication or something, sometimes it takes a little while. But,
I mean, part of grief is anger.
Right.
I mean, that's part of grief.
And some of it is good, because it keeps you motivated. It keeps you from going into depression. So,
Yeah, anger is definitely a legitimate emotion, like you're both saying. So for those of you that are angry out there, that is part of grief.
Yeah. So Nicole says that she encourages her clients to watch The Shack. One client was adamant it was a turning point in her grief. And Sonia said, my daughter died 14 months ago. This is 14 months ago. I choose not to talk about her anymore to protect my feelings, especially with my family. One of my brothers suggested I throw everything out. I guess out of sight, out of mind. She's in my thoughts all the time, even in my dreams. Wow. Let me say, Sonia, 14 months. No, you need to talk. Yeah, and you're here telling us right now. Thank you. Make this a start for you to talk about her.
And this is what I would say about throwing away her things. Don't do that, because you can't get them back. What I would say was, if you feel like you want to remove them, put them in a bin and put them in storage and wait for a few years, because you're very new in your grief. And then you can revisit the things and decide, what do I want? What don't I want? You can make teddy bears and pillows out of her clothes. Things can be, done with those things. You can give them away to certain people, but wait right now.
And everybody processes grief differently, because I know it tends to be a man-woman thing, but not all the time. But like women, we're very emotional. For me, I was one of them. I was at the cemetery all the time. I was looking at her pictures and crying all the time. I was holding her, what I had of her, all the time, and crying. And my husband, the protector, he wants to take care of everybody and protect everybody. And the other side of things is, if you would stop stop looking at that stuff, if you would stop going to the cemetery, if you would, because for the other side, those things are a distraction to work through the grief. Whereas for some people, that's what's needed to work through the grief. And so there's such a huge difference on how we need to process our grief, and neither one of them is wrong.
So let's talk about taking care of yourself during this new year.
Yeah, well, this is actually a good swing into that, because we're talking about the health issue. Our health affects everything. If our health affects our emotions, it just affects everything. And so I think for a lot of people, rather than attacking the emotional side of grief, it's easier and good for us to begin looking at the physical side and what can we do to get healthy? What can we do? Because if our body is functioning and is in a healthier state, then it's going to be able to help us handle the emotional issues of grief. And so you can see there's a list there. Getting the right amount of sleep is really important. I know that's hard during grief, and so sometimes we may have to get some help with that. Doing exercises.
Let me talk about sleep for a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because that, I remember I was staying up, our 14-year-old daughter, I was staying up with her, and I was exhausted. I finally decided I had to get some sleep and went to bed. I mean, you do, try to stay watch for your other family members when you've had a loss. And I finally had to start taking sleeping pills, and I don't take pills, but that was the most relieving thing I could do, was to actually get a night's sleep.
My father-in-law has been known to say sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is get some sleep.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to remind people about sleep is that sometimes we drink alcohol in the evening because it makes us tired or whatever, when we're upset. But the reality is, we had Jed Black on, who's a sleep expert, and you can go on and Google his show on Open to Hope, where Jed talks about the fact that drinking in the evening will wake you up about 1 o'clock in the morning. So not a good idea to deal with your grief and loss through drinking alcohol, and, try to get a good night's sleep.
And if people are concerned about taking sleeping pills, there are so many natural products you can take, like melatonin, things like that can help you in a natural state. Drinking chamomile tea, taking a warm bath. Get in a nighttime routine, turn off the TV, all those digital rays that they talk about, and read a book, those kinds of things that will help.
My sister says that when she can't sleep, and if she wakes up in the middle of the night, she has a sleeping app that she listens to on her headset. And she said it really helps and it really puts her to sleep. It's a meditation app.
So another thing is to exercise or take walks. Even if you just get outside and walk around the block, you just get out, get some movement in. It's so easy for us to just sit and sit and sit and sit.
Yeah, especially when it's grief and loss and people might be sitting around talking. You really should try to get up every hour and, move.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just walking around the room or whatever.
And walking is a big thing. I mean, that's how I exercise. Walking is, I think we tend to minimize walking, and walking is exercise. And Mom,
it's a stress reliever.
What, Laura?
It's a stress reliever.
Yes, and you're moving your body. It's exercising. You don't have to go run a marathon to be exercising. We've seen research. My mom and I have seen research that shows that if you tell yourself that you are burning calories and exercising before you clean your house, your mind gets in that mindset and you will burn more calories. So remember that when you're cleaning your house.
I think it's important. That's my big exercise. I walk every day, about 3 miles a day. And
walking helps you sleep better at night.
Yeah, absolutely. So exercise.
Plus for it.
And, even if you start out by doing something for 5 minutes a day or something like that, take it small. One of the problems with exercise, and I've talked about it before when we present, is I used to run, and after my son was killed, one day I had this little voice say, "You're going to get sick if you don't exercise." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. Yes, you are." I had this little personal argument with myself. And so I decided I would go out and run, and I got my running shoes on and went out of the house, and I was so ashamed and so embarrassed. I'm sure my neighbors were looking out the window saying, look at her, she doesn't care that her son died, she's out working out. And I think we are afraid to take care of ourselves because it won't show how deeply in despair that we are. We let ourselves go in ways, gain weight or lose weight or whatever. We don't take care of our bodies partially because we're embarrassed. I mean, we should not even be alive, sometimes we feel. And so
isn't it amazing how we let what other people think about, what we think other people are thinking shape what we do?
We're thinking about how others are going to perceive us. And I think that there's a lot of shame and embarrassment that comes with loss, which is an odd thing to say. But I think that people that have had a loss realize what I'm talking about. And so we feel embarrassed and shamed if we're working out. And I felt embarrassed and shamed that my brother died, which is a very strange emotion. But then I went and talked to other siblings who said, yeah, we feel the same way because it hasn't happened to anybody else. It's a weird place to be.
Yeah, and parents, we're ashamed that we didn't take care of our kids. We should have parents take care of their kids. People's kids don't die.
And these are irrational thoughts, but grief is irrational.
Yeah,
Yep,
and
exactly.
I'm sure sibling. I mean, I'm sure spouses feel like that they should have taken better care of their spouse, and kids feel like they should have taken care of their parents, and vice
And
versa.
it's a whole nother reason why it's so important to connect with other people who are sharing that same type of grief, because then you can find out that these irrational things are normal. I'm not going crazy. Other people have had these thoughts, and that whole thing, people will think I'm not grieving if I don't, and people will think I'm not grieving if I do.
Right.
It's like you can't win. You can't base what you do on what you think other people are thinking about you.
Right.
And also you're thinking stuff about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other piece. You're feeling like I'm a bad person if I take care of myself. I didn't love Scott if I take care of myself. Those kind of things.
I also think that one of the reasons that we want to believe that we could have saved them is because it makes a safe world, and it means that we can control not losing another child or not losing another parent or spouse or whatever, or a sibling. We have some control over our world, and we have to realize that it's giving up that idea that we have control over what goes on in life. I mean, I surrender to the process or to life or whatever and live with what is.
We know that what we put in our body affects us. It affects us physically, emotionally, it affects our health affects our emotions. I mean, it's just one of those circle things. I know when I was grieving, Becca's like, I didn't care what I ate. If I wanted that third piece of chocolate cake, I was going to have it because I'm grieving and I deserve it. And I'm still paying the price for that. I have another friend that when her daughter died by suicide, she very quickly understood how important it was going to be to eat healthy and to go out of her way to make sure she was drinking enough pure water and eating the right foods and taking supplements. And I have to say, it really helped her with the grieving process because she was determined that her health was not going to be an additional area that she was going to struggle in, which just affected everything.
Well, Holly said that her pets have helped her. We didn't even mention that. Pets can be big. My dog, she takes her dogs for walks and talk to him. She said pets are unconditionally loving. I love that. We did get a dog, but I always say to people, if you're not a dog lover, don't just get a dog to take for walks because borrow the neighbors.
Those dogs were amazing, Mom, because when Scott died, people ran away from our family. People tried to hide when they saw us. People didn't know what to say. And when you bring a dog, like you said, you have to love animals, but bringing a little dog into our lives brought people towards us.
Yeah, they all wanted to see the puppy.
Yeah, a cat or whatever. And so many people say the dog is what got me outside. I had to get my dog outside. I had to take him for a walk. And that's what really pushed them into getting to a better place.
Yeah.
So Janet says something the widow community recommends is to take care of yourself first and be gentle with yourself. And I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, breathing deep is it eliminates a lot of health issues. A lot of times we don't realize we're getting headaches, all kinds of things. And it's in our grief. We forget to breathe. Literally, I remember sitting in a chair thinking I'm not breathing. And I had to remind myself to take a breath. And so it's important to take those deep breaths. It gets oxygen to our brain. It just does all kinds of health things. It's healthy for us to breathe deeply.
And the short breaths are the parasympathetic, the deep breaths are the repose and repair, the relaxing.
Finding a way to honor your child's life. I said at the beginning that we can either choose to stay, after we're getting through that deep grief, we get to the point where we start choosing, am I going to stay in this place and let people feel sorry for me and wallow in this and keep going as a victim? And am I going to is my child's, the whole memory going to be about my child's death? Or am I going to make it about my child's life? And so it's really important, I feel like, one of the most healing things we can do is to find ways to honor your child, find ways to let your child's legacy go on. And there's so many ways to do that. And this picture here, actually, something that my husband and I did, I was an international children's minister for many years before Becca died. And so we contacted some friends in Rwanda, and we said we would like to bless a family who needs help, who needs something. We wanted to bless them with a gift of money. And so they found a family that had been wanting to open up a little store so that they could support themselves. And so we provided the money for them to open up a little store for their community. And as far as we know, it's still going. And this is a picture of that family.
That's a wonderful story, Laura. I love that.
Yeah, that's great.
You have permission to be happy again. You have permission to laugh again. We feel so guilty to laugh. We feel so guilty. How can I be happy? And that whole thing about what do people think of me? I'm over here laughing and my child has died. That's another time where it's so good to be around people who are experiencing the same kind of grief, because you can laugh together without that kind of guilt. You can laugh together without wondering what other people are thinking. But there are so many just little things. Start enjoying little things like the smell of cookies baking in the oven, or the beauty of a sunset, or just smile. We talked about that on the last webinar we did together, that smiling does all kinds of things, the endorphins and all the things it releases. We just want to give you permission. It's okay to move forward at whatever pace you're ready to move forward in. But go ahead and move forward. Take those baby steps and move forward.
Absolutely. And find yourself something from this webinar we've done with you today to take you into the new year. Make one little resolution for yourself.
Yes.
That's come up for you. And here are all Laura's fabulous books. And she is such a fantastic graphic artist, and we're so lucky to know her. And we hope that you will go to her site. You can see it down there. She's on Facebook. And get some of her books. They're absolutely amazing. You want to say anything about those, Laura, before we close?
Well, the last book is not on there. I actually just did an Advent book for grieving parents. It's called Hope for the Future, an Advent Journey for Bereaved Parents, which obviously is gone for the season, but, keep it in mind for when it comes around again. And I just want to say about the website, if people are interested, if you go to the website, I have about halfway down, you can see where you can put your name and email in. But I offer just a sheet. It's 30 suggestions to bring ourselves comfort and take care of ourselves. So if you want some more ideas, some more suggestions, you can go to our website and just scroll down halfway down the page, and you'll see where you can give us your name and email, and you can get that sheet of 30 suggestions.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Laura. And we want to thank everybody who joined us for this webinar, and great questions. And thank you so much. And Heidi and Laura, do you want to say something before we close?
Just keep going. One day, one step, one breath at a time. Just keep going. You'll make it.
Laura, I love all that you've done. I love all these books. You are such an example that you can find hope again. And we always say, if you've lost hope, please lean on mine, lean on my mom's, and lean on Laura's until you find your own.